The Reformed Gamers is brought to you 100% independent and ad-free thanks to our dear patrons over on patreon.com/reformedgamers to get yourself sweet, sweet perks such as uncut early access to the episodes, special episodes of the podcast, and more. Head on over to patreon.com/reformedgamers and consider lending support and joining the herd. Without further ado, let's hop into the show.
Welcome, dear listeners, to episode 171 of The Reformed Gamers, the show all about theology, video games, and telling you what the show is all about. Which I guess we just did that in the intro. Anyway, I'm your host, Logan.
And I'm his co-host, Adam.
Man, Adam, bro, Tato, Chip, Burrito Supreme, we are finally back on a show together.
Back at it. We had like that one episode where we got back together, and then I missed a couple, and then we did the PS5 event. And then I disappeared again. It's just life, man. I mean, COVID pandemic is throwing everything throwing everything off and timing. But hey, we can't, and I tell people often, I'm like, I can't change anything what happened yesterday, but I'm here today, I can change today. And so we're going to record today like we've done 171 other times.
It's a lot of times, man.
It's a lot of times.
And when you factor in the bonus stuff that we've done, that even pushes it closer to probably 200, which is wild to think about.
At least. Because we used to do like loot boxes, and now we do patch notes. I mean, the fact that we've been on the mics with each other probably 300 times is kind of wild. I don't know how many things I've done 300 times in my life.
Yep.
Very few.
That's crazy, man. That's crazy. Wow. It's funny. I was thinking about how long the show has been around the other day. And dude, it's so wild to think that we've been around at this point for 5.5 years. Mm-hmm. We've survived half of 2020 so far. And if we make it through the rest of it, man.
By God's grace.
I mean, come on.
You know what I'm saying? When we were talking the other day, I was saying, I've been doing the podcast basically ever since we've been married. Or me and Hannah, because right after we got, I came back to the States from living overseas. I got my new job. I moved to my apartment. I started listening to you guys, and it was probably 2 or 3 months after Hannah and I got married that me and you got married to the podcast.
Yep.
And so it's kind of crazy to think I'm not so. It's almost a part of our, Hannah and I's marriage. It's like, I don't know what being married and not doing the podcast is like, because I've been doing it so long, which is crazy. And I mean, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I don't know what we would do without it at this point. I feel like it'd be like losing, I don't know, my childhood all over again in some weird way. But all that reminiscing aside, dear listeners, we are back to do a little bit of a different episode this time around. The show has been growing over the last year, and we've been meeting new people. We've been interacting with other podcasts, and really just, in a lot of ways, growing. And we thought it would be good to make a kind of jumping on point for any new listeners. Similar to what comic books tend to do from time to time, they kind of reboot things or refresh things and create new jumping on points. This one right here is a good jumping on point for any new listeners that are new to the show and are curious what the Reformed Gamers is even all about. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Before we get into the show, a little bit of housekeeping like we always do here. Just want to remind you guys some of the new stuff that's going up on our website. Micah actually just finished a 2-part series reviewing the Xbox and PlayStation this past generation, going over some of the things they got right and some of the things that they got wrong. Both are actually really good articles. I know people that are longtime listeners to the show know that we are self-proclaimed Sony ponies. We love the PlayStation 4 quite a bit, and we have a little bit of admiration for the Nintendo Switch, or maybe a lot, depending on what day it is. But when it comes to the Xbox, not so much. But I will say, both articles were very well balanced and called out the appropriate things that need to be called out. Micah did a good job on kind of raking PlayStation through the coals on a few things, so to speak, and he did a good thing. Did some good praise. I don't know how to say words, man. Words are hard. He did a good job highlighting some of the strong points of Xbox this past generation, including the Xbox Game Pass, which the more games that gets added to that just makes me just sit and go, how does this thing exist in the timeline that we live in? I don't understand it. One of the other things that's going on the website is actually all throughout the month of July, Wesley is going to be writing in what's called the Summer of Persona. He's going to talk about Persona 3, 4, and 5, going in depth into the themes. What kind of philosophical things are they pushing forward? How does it line up with the Christian worldview? And answering the question, should Christians even play these video games? I'm hoping Wes arrives at the answer of a glowing yes at the end of it. But hey,
if not, why are we doing our podcast?
I know, right? That's really all we exist to do is just talk about Persona and Raz on the Xbox. And that's no, I'm kidding. But no, for real, it's a cool series. Wesley's been prepping that thing really for the last month and a half, and so it's going to be good stuff. It's going to be really good work, and really, if you have read some of his retrospectives, you have a taste of what's to come because he's going to crank it up to 11 on this series. So I'm excited for that. You guys can be looking forward to that on the website. Link will be in your show notes. As always, if you're not in our Discord server, what is wrong with you? Get in there, have some fun, especially if you're trying to build a PC or get help with streaming on Twitch. I would say we could get help streaming on Mixer, but that's going away pretty soon, so you might as well not even start there. So just get started on Twitch. But yeah, so join our Discord server. We would love to have you over there. Link will be in your show notes for an invite. And speaking of Twitch, you can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/thetheologan. Stream every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I'm streaming the Batman Arkham games all throughout the summer, so I'd love for you to stop by and let's talk about how awesome Batman is and why he would always beat Superman in a fair fight. Now, if you like what we do here at the show, if you've been with us for a while and you would like to financially support us and get yourself some extra perks like early uncut access to all of the episodes, behind the scenes, and more, you can go over to patreon.com/thereformedgamers and consider lending your support. But if you can't support us financially, we totally understand. We would ask that you go to your podcast app of choice and leave a glowing review of the show, or maybe a slightly dimmed one too. Just be honest. You could literally just go to the podcast app and just give a 5-star review and be like, I like Lamp or something. I don't care. But just go in there, leave a rating and review. That way it helps us kind of get boosted up in the aggregator of choice. I know we're not Dwayne Atkinson's Just Thinking podcast. We're not number one of the Christian podcast list on iTunes, which, by the way, congrats to that, Dwayne. But we could at least get into the top 1,000 with your support.
Hey,
that's all we're asking for.
We did beat, what was the podcast in that bracket that we beat? I'm trying to remember.
What did we beat?
The Doug Wilson's?
Yeah, what is his podcast called?
I don't know, but we beat it. That's all that matters. That's why we beat it, because no one knows it.
Take that, Federal Vision.
Then we got taken out by, what was it? Ligoniers?
I think it was Renewing Your Mind with RC Sproul. I'm like, there's no way we're going to beat RC Sproul. There's no way.
We had a good run. We had our upset.
We had a good run. We did. That was kind of what really put us on the map. They're like, who is this Reformed Gamers show? Like, what in the world? Their meme game is on point. By the way, fun fact, our latest meme made by Steven Gutierrez about the whatever the dude was that has the poor trigger discipline in St. Louis that was defending his home. We made that into a meme saying that it's like a new Call of Duty operator leaked. That thing broke 10,000 views. Dang. Like the reach and all that. I'm like, dude, Steven, knocking it out of the park with the meme game. Anyway, that being said, dear listeners, you guys can go follow us on social media and interact with that fun stuff. But we've talked long enough. I've talked long enough. Adam, let's get into the show, man. Hello and welcome to the Reformed Gamers. I'd like to start the show like we always do with a little bit of what have we been playing. And Adam, you handsome bearded man, what have you been getting into?
Yeah, I mean, there's really only one thing for me to be talking about. I have been playing some Dragon Quest XI. That's on my Switch.
Tell me about it.
Again, this isn't the main thing I'm going to talk about, but I'm 8 or 9 hours into it, and I'm enjoying it. I'm much, I'm into the meat of the game a little bit more. It takes it a while to kind of get going.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. You play it for like almost an hour or two, and then I feel like you finally see the title screen, which is interesting. But I feel like I'm going at a good pace. with how long I think the game is, I'm kind of like, some of the later chapters must really be longer than some of the earlier chapters, because I feel like, I'm like, man, I'm going to beat this. This, hours per chapter is not lining up to what
Hmm.
I'm looking at. So I'm guessing some of the later chapters are just longer, but I'm enjoying it. For reference for you and anyone who played it, I just got done helping the Sultan and his son, who's kind of like a sissy or whatever.
Yeah, I know where that's
So
at.
just got done with that, and it's good. It's a good time. Been playing that on my new adapter. I'll talk about a little bit later in the recos, but the Fixture S1 adapter, where I can play with my Pro controller and it kind of mounts my Switch on a little. It's like a screen holder, and then you connect it to your Pro controller, so I can play with it. Because I'd never play on my television. Do you ever play your Switch on your television?
I'd say it's about 70% of the time that I play my Switch, it's on my television.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I'm probably 95% handheld.
Wow.
I never. If I'm going to be playing on my TV, I'm usually playing my PlayStation. My Switch
Yeah.
is really okay if I'm multitasking, watching something and playing my Switch. But what that means is I never play with my Pro controller. So this allows me to do that, because I love my Pro controller, but I never am on my TV. So really excited to get to use that more in the coming weeks. But the biggest thing I've been really playing is The Last of Us Part 2. I don't want to go too deep into
Oh,
it
here we go.
because I know our next episode is going to be on The Last of Us Part 2. But
Mm-hmm.
what can I share?
I feel like that game has been spoiled to just oblivion at this point, but I totally
I'm definitely not gonna spoil anything.
right.
I'm pretty close to the end. I think I'm
Okay.
probably 3 or 4 hours at most until the end. And the more I play it, I kept waiting and waiting and waiting for it to get to this uber depressing, uber gory, harsh video game. And maybe I'm just desensitized, but I don't feel like it's got to that point.
Okay.
Yes, there are moments of violence. There's something from one of the initial trailers. I think it was maybe the reveal, where they had someone they show a character kind of hanging, and they get shot. An arrow shoots the rope and they fall. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
And
that was
seeing
when Abby was
everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, this game's going to be so gory." That's
yeah.
probably been if not the hardest scenes in the game to watch.
Okay.
There's been a couple other pretty violent scenes, but it's definitely not been this unbearable game of all I'm thinking is I heard some people be they play through the game oh, I don't do this, and I'm like, I feel like a lot of it is going the way that you would kind of think it's going at this point. So that's some of my initial thoughts on those things. Again, I'm not finished with it, so I don't want to speak too much, because it could take a hard turn towards the end. I don't know. But
Mm-hmm.
some of the, people are calling it, woke leftism, social justice warrior. I don't feel like even that stuff is over the top. Yes, this isn't a spoiler. Ellie's a lesbian. That's not a surprise to anyone who played the first game.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple things in the game. It's well aware that she is that in the game, but I don't feel like it's, again, there's moments, but it's not like a continual, they're going out of their way to make sure this is known type thing.
Right.
I feel like they're just telling a story. And so, again, we'll probably get into some of this stuff towards the end of the show, or towards the topic of the show, but I don't feel like anything so far, again, with about 4 hours left, that's oh my goodness, this is the worst storytelling. They're just pushing agendas in my face. I'm like, no, it's a story. I'm like, you see, again, this maybe isn't the right justification, but I'm like, we see more than this in television and movies, on advertisements. If you're watching television long enough, you're going to see an ad for some sort of AIDS or homosexuality drug or something like that. All these testing things to help prevent different things. So I'm like, I don't know. And maybe and I'll finish with this. maybe my expectations were so far that, thinking about the gore and the agendas and all these different things, maybe I was expecting them to be so far, like so much that now that I'm in it, they're not like meeting the expectation. It's been built up so much. I think maybe they could have been overbuilt. So all that said, I'm enjoying the game as much as you can enjoy a game like this. I think the story is very interesting, and I think the way they're telling the story is, man, it's got me thinking. I'm really excited to talk about it next recording with a couple guys, because there's a lot to think about.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds like it. I don't know. I haven't played it for myself. But that being said, I'll just go ahead and announce it now. We are going to have, we're working on getting Matt Millsap and Ched Spellman back on. If you guys probably remember them, Matt has done the God of War episode with us, and Ched and Matt both did the What Remains of Edith Finch episode with us. So we're trying to get them on for that episode, because I know they both finished the game recently. They have a lot to talk about.
I'm telling you, Matt's, if he comes on with this, he's getting two of the, well, again, this is maybe subjective, but for sure on God of War, but potentially two of the greatest games of the generation. He gets to be on the review episode. That's, man, he's pulling some good strings to get those episodes if he's able to join us.
Yep. He's just got really good insights. And really, we could just let him talk the entire episode.
No doubt. We're bringing on the professors, and I'm just going to be chilling in the background, like, teach.
Well, it's like that episode with that we had where they both were on with talking about What Remains of Edith Finch, and Ched was just like, yeah, pretty much whatever Matt said, I agree with. Yeah. Most of the episode so it'll probably be a lot of that, but still, you guys can be looking forward to that. We'll give you that one for free, so to speak, and you guys can look forward to that there. So as far as what I've been playing, how do I talk about this? Both of the games I've been playing are two beefy games. Let's just start with Xenoblade. I've been getting into Xenoblade Chronicles more, making more progress into it. I'm about 40 hours into the game, and I just reached chapter 12, I think it was. And I've reached a point where I literally can't talk about any story beat, because there have been a couple of big twists since the last episode. And all I can say is this here. And I said this also on Aaron White's podcast, The Games We Love, talking about Titanfall 2, which comes out later this month, that you all know how much I love Persona 4 Golden, right? One of my favorite JRPGs of all time.
What's he about to say?
I know. If this story continues going the way it's going and continues ramping up and continues making me feel for these characters, it might edge out over that just a little bit in terms of story, but in terms of like other things, that the case is the verdict is still out on those. But my goodness, what a story! The only thing I can really do is recap. Just the game is essentially about revenge. Shulk and his crew are going after the Mechonis because they attacked their village, and they're like, you know what, we've had enough. We want to end these things. And then as you keep going, things happen. You start learning more about the Mechonis, which are these giant these giant robots, really is what they are, these giant mechs. And just some certain things get revealed. Oh my gosh. That's the thing. I can't talk about this game without spoiling it. But it's really good. There was a point in the game where, because I have played so much of this game and have gotten really invested in the characters, there was this really beautiful moment in the game that literally just brought me to tears. I didn't shed a tear, but it brought me to the edge of that. And man, it's a great game.
And the gameplay is great also. It's different. That's what I like about it. It's a very different gameplay system with, breaks and
right.
What's the other thing? You break first, and then you
break, and then you topple, and then you daze. Yeah.
And so all of those things. It's a really fun combat system too.
Yeah, because and I guess to describe the combat system for folks who maybe have never played the game before, the combat is different in that you approach a target, you lock on, and you hit a certain button and you start auto attacking, kind of like an MMO.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a hot bar at the bottom that has your different skills that you can rotate in and out outside of combat that allow you to do certain things depending on where you're positioned on the enemy. And you can really just kind of outfit your characters in whatever class you really want to. If you want to make Shulk a tank, you can do that. If you want to make him a healer, you could. I don't know if that's very effective, but if you want to do it, you can. And so it's cool how you can outfit these characters in certain ways, and the combat gets more in depth as you start adding in those attacks that inflict things like break, and then a topple, and then a daze, and then all of a sudden you're doing a I can't remember what the move is called, but it's like where you have each character attack in unison almost. And so it's really cool. And then the Monado, which is Shulk's sword, does like all sorts of buffs and things like that. Oh man, there's so much
a lot
depth
of
to the
systems
game.
that you can manage.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much personalization. I heard they simplified some of that a little bit more in the Switch version. I haven't played it yet to see, but there's so much that you can do with each character and their weapons and their classes. I mean, like you said, there's so much personalization that, it can be a little bit too much at times if you're not careful.
It definitely can. It definitely can. And then, I mean, just aside from that, you have a plethora, a wide array of side quests to do. You have big, huge open areas to explore. It's a really good game, and this is a game that I think for this season has been really good for me because it's forced me to slow down and really enjoy the ride. You know, sometimes when I play games for this podcast, I want to breeze through them as fast as I can so I can talk about them. But you can't really do that in Xenoblade. You have to play the game at its own pace, sort of way. And it's just, and that's not a negative thing. That's a positive thing because it kind of gets you to really enjoy the game in that way. But all that to say, 40 hours in on the game, really enjoying it. Can't wait to play more. And I've just really enjoyed it. I do also want to talk briefly, well, as briefly as you can about this game. This tabletop game that you guys may have heard of. We did an episode with one of the creators called Godspeed. It's not a video game. It's a tabletop game. And boy, howdy, is this unlike any other tabletop game that I've ever played. And I say that because there's a lot more systems to it than other tabletop games that I've played, like Pandemic, and it's kind of fitting considering we're in the middle of one. Playing that, or Ticket to Ride, or even Betrayal on House at Haunted Hill, or however that title goes. But here's the thing about the game, right? When you first play it, if you're new to tabletop games, it's going to be overwhelming. But I want to encourage you to stick with it because when you finally get the systems down, when you finally get the systems down and you finally get the order of play down, and everything starts clicking together, and you're like, okay, I need to build this round. If you're doing 2 players, you can institute blockers, which is really fun. In doing all that stuff. It's just, there's a lot of systems to it. I can't explain it very well in just 10 minutes. We would need a whole episode for it. And thankfully there is a whole episode of our show for that. You guys can go check that out in our backlog. But I will say this, it is very much worth I think I paid like $60 for it on Amazon. It's really good. If you're looking for a game that you want to play with your family, that brings everybody together, definitely check it out. Like I said, pretty big learning curve. But stick with it, play slow, get used to the different mechanics, and you'll be okay.
Once you get 2 or 3 rounds into it, the flow just makes sense. You know,
right.
The way the board is set up, you go from left to right. It just kind of makes sense. Now, when you're in the action phase, there's definitely a lot of things that you can be doing.
Right.
So that can sometimes be well, what should I do? It's going to take you a minute to understand strategy, and I'm still not quite there. But every time I've taught someone, it takes a bit to get through the rules and when you're done kind of going through things, you know, they got these huge eyes. But I'm like, let's just start playing, and it will make sense. And so once you get playing 2 to 3 rounds in, it's pretty free flowing. But the first, hour or so of teaching and getting the game going, it can be a lot. But I've got 3 groups of people that or 2 families, and then another buddy. I've taught them how to play, so I've kind of got a group of people now that I don't have to teach anymore, so we can just like get together and play, which is awesome. Because I don't want to teach it every time I play, because I'm like, then it becomes like a 3-hour game when it could.
Right.
When you play with everybody who knows, it can be hour and a half, maybe, you know.
For sure. I think my wife and I's first game, when we were going through the rules and everything, I think it was about 2 hours is what it took us.
Yeah.
We really, because with the game, there's a 2 to 3 player variant that's different than what it is with 4 to, I think, 6 players is what you can have.
5.
And is it 5?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So, okay, anyway, there's a different, there's a variant way that you can play it if it's just 2 people, 2 to 3 people. But man, it once you get it, man, it's cool. I will say that my wife, as usual, when we play tabletop games, she completely schooled me in the game, which I should have expected. But I naively thought I could take her down, but no, I couldn't. I did talk to Clay though, and he gave me some tips, so I'm gonna use those.
Yeah, I got Clay on speed dial.
Yeah,
I've
buddy.
him once just to be like, "Hey, I've got a question about the rules," and he's like, "Yeah, go for it." And so I told him he's the helpline for Godspeed.
Yep, for sure. But yeah, cool game, and gosh, dude, that all the pieces to that game, high quality, dude. That
high
board,
quality.
I think that board alone is like the nicest piece that I've bought in a tabletop game.
The gold pieces.
Like,
I mean,
bro.
It's like metal. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's nice.
It's a heavy
you got
box.
the Kickstarter one, right?
Yeah, I got the deluxe. I got even more pieces, right. Man. I got the nice plastic pieces. I mean, it's it's like my box is busting out of the seams. I can't even put everything in it barely. It's like too much, but it's nice.
It is. So anyway, dear listeners, early reco for me. Godspeed. Great game. Let's move over and switch over to what have we been reading, Adam, man? What have you been getting into?
Yeah, I've been going through, I feel like the book of Isaiah for about 3 months. But I'm on chapter 59. And it's been good, man. God has been so good, and just my Devo time. There's been a couple times I've kind of off, kind of went off the plan, and I've read a couple Our Daily Breads, and they've been just very timely. Because I'm like, so usually if I'm jumping to that, it's because honestly I'm being lazy or I'm discouraged, and it feels like every time that I do that, the Devo in that plan is like exactly what I need. So God has been super gracious, even in sometimes my bad attitude. He's really been good. But been reading in Isaiah 59 this morning, and it was like, man, it'll preach. Basically, it looks at. It starts off saying, "Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, or his ear dull that it cannot hear." But then it goes into, so first of all, we have a God who can and is ready and willing to save. But then it brings up sin. But because of our sin, we're separated from God. And it talks through the way that sin separates us from a holy God. And then it gets down to verse 16, and it says, he saw, speaking of God, he saw that there was no man, and wondered that there was no one to intercede. Then his own arm brought salvation, and his righteousness upheld him. So he's looking around and saying, man, because of sin, who can intercede on behalf of these people? Who can intercede on sinful, broken man? Well, God makes a way, and he sends his son to intercede. And then it kind of goes into Christ interceding, and all these people fearing the Lord from the east to the west, his glory. And it was just really, I mean, I'm just reading the gospel and being able to connect the New Testament to the Old Testament and seeing the way that Christ fulfilled what the prophet Isaiah was talking about, hundreds of years before that. And so I'm going to be getting some opportunities to preach here in the next couple of months, and I'm kind of co-preaching the book of 1 John with another pastor. But I'm kind of like, between Isaiah 52 through 55 and now Isaiah 59, I'm like, there's some good stuff I'm ready to preach in Isaiah. I just don't know when I'm going to get to preach it. And so, it's been a really rich time in Isaiah. I should be done with it in the next week or two. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of book I go to next. But yeah, it's been some really if you need some encouragement, go Isaiah 50 to 59, 60. It's some good encouraging stuff, just straight gospel, looking at the suffering servant and Christ coming and dying for us. It's, again, things prophesied hundreds of years in advance that Christ fulfilled. It's awesome.
Man. And that's kind of the cool thing is when you read scripture, specifically the Old Testament, and you read those things, and then like you see when you go over to the New Testament how all that's been fulfilled in Christ. It's like, it's just I don't know. Maybe we get really nerdy about that, and we're like, that's really singing cool, and other people it's not that exciting. But I think stuff like that should excite us because that just lends itself to the what is the word? Sufficiency of Scripture, I think, is what I'm looking for, and just how it all connects.
Gives us confidence. It shows us that the Bible wasn't just made up.
Right.
It's true. We've got prophecies that were fulfilled. I mean, you look at again all people describe it as maps, manuscripts, the prophecies, the artifacts, all these different things that prove the truth of Scripture. And it speaks for itself, but there are these other things, and people who, non-Christians, who talked about this man Jesus. So it's not just we only have the Bible. The Bible speaks for itself, but we have outside sources that also speak into who Jesus was, what he did. These Christians, that were causing a ruckus in Rome, in the surrounding areas, in Israel, and all this stuff. So it's really cool because it gives us more confidence. It should give us like more trust, more hope to be like, because we're like everyone else. We have our days where we doubt. It's like, what is it, Paul? Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I have those moments where I like, am I sure? And then God's word speaks into it. I'm super thankful for that.
Yeah, definitely. That's good, man. So what I've been getting into is one that I tend to visit fairly frequently. This is a passage in Scripture, or several passages in Scripture. They get some kind of frequent flyer miles, so to speak, in terms of my reading. But I was revisiting Ephesians 2, 8 through 10, that I'm sure a lot of people have read several times, or have maybe seen the little devotional that I put out on the YouTube channel. But it reads, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, and not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." And I think, there's so much in these verses that really just stand out. But I think the one thing that does stand out the most to me is that really the whole idea, the fact, just our faith. I think the thing that stands out to me is just our faith, the fact that it's a gift of God. It's not something we can earn. If it was something that we could earn, we could lose it, because it would be up to us to essentially ensure that we continue to have it. But because of God gifting it to us, it's not based on anything we've done or are currently doing or will do in the future. It is based entirely out of his grace and mercy and love, and it's gifted to us. And it's something that we can't really, it's something that we can't lose. And with that too, it gives us this assurance that, there's a plan for us. As Christians, God has a plan for us to do a variety of things. When it comes to this podcast, I didn't think that God would, 10 years ago, I didn't think God would have me doing this podcast, but here we are, and we're reaching out to people, and we're building communities and encouraging one another. And it's cool to see that, and it's one of those things that we don't really kind of see. We might anticipate some aspects of it, but once we're in it, we can look back and go, man, I did not expect to be where I am today. And that's all that God is doing, or that's all God's doing in our lives with the plan that he prepared beforehand for us. And the beautiful thing with that is that Scripture says that he who began a good work in you will carry it through to the day of completion. And so in those days where we are doubting, kind of like what Adam mentioned, we need to ask ourselves, well, am I face to face with Jesus? No, that means God's not done with me yet. So there's more to do. And so it's one of those things that I go to from time to time remember those 2 verses or 3 verses, and just get encouraged and just keep moving, man. And so it's really good. I love those verses. So hopefully that's an encouragement to you, dear listeners out there. But in a way, that's a bit of a segue into the topic of the show, which before we get into that, just a quick reminder to rate and review the show on your podcast app of choice. Again, that does help us out quite a bit. I don't know, leave a 5-star review and tell us what your favorite toppings on tacos are. That'll be a fun review, and that'll really catch the eye of some people browsing the iTunes store. But we talk about this thing about God having a plan for our lives, and that he's prepared these things beforehand for us to do, that we should walk in them. And in a huge way, Adam, this podcast has been one of those things for us to do. And I think it would be a good time for us to kind of revisit really what is TRG all about? What are we trying to do with the show? What is the goal, or so to speak, to kind of help with, because like I said earlier in the show, 2020 has been a year where we've seen a lot of growth, and we've seen a lot of new listeners coming on that are new to the show, that are have told us they're enjoying the content. But I think it would be helpful for them to get a clear picture of what we're all about here, and even maybe remind some of our current listeners what we're all about as well, and kind of what the show is all about. Because this is a very different kind of Christian video game show than what is out there amongst the podcasting world. A lot of people say they have a Christian gaming podcast, but really what it amounts to, and I don't say this like disparagingly, it's we talk about, the show is the same as other video game podcasts out there, with some Christian stuff brought into it, or like, hey, this is why I'm not playing this game sort of thing. But we really take the two and slam them together on this show to discuss a wide array of topics that you guys can go back in our backlog and check out. And I guess really to start off with this, as we have it in the notes, the idea behind TRG, or kind of what we know about video games. I'll just read the thing here and quit mumbling. Everything has a worldview, right? Whether you're watching a movie, reading a book, or playing a video game, we are engaging with another worldview when we are engaging with our hobbies. And so today on this episode, we want to explain kind of the purpose behind what we do here at TRG, how we approach video games from a biblical worldview, and what can ultimately be learned from doing that. And I think that's something we try to do on the show, whether we're talking about ROMs and emulators, or specific video games and the themes that are contained within. And so I think this would be a good idea or a good time to just lay that out, and what it means to be a reformed gamer. And I think I want to make this distinction clear, because I think some people kind of get this misconstrued, or they misunderstand this when they see the name of the show called The Reformed Gamers, right? So I want to explain kind of how the word reformed in our name takes 2 different meanings, right? It takes a meaning in terms of theology and a meaning of practice. And so what I mean by theology is that the word reform gives you an idea where Adam and I are going to kind of lean more when we discuss theology. I think it depends on who you ask. Some people will probably not call us reformed or not reformed enough. So that's why we tend to refer to ourselves as a generally reformed, which is a very deep cut into the older episodes of our podcast. But what we tend to do is we tend to lean more on the reform side of things. And so that gives you a good primer as to where we're going to be coming from. And so especially when we did the episode on the doctrine of adoption, you really heard it in there. And so that just gives you an idea. But at the same time, while that's where we lean, this show isn't necessarily directed specifically at people who hold to Reformed theology. If you're Arminian or whatever it is, you can still listen to the show. We just want you to know kind of where we're coming from in that regard. But it also means reformed in practice. When I was starting this show, and I was looking for really this kind of show, what we do here, and I'll get into that in a second, I didn't find it anywhere. I was looking for podcasts that would talk about things within the gaming world, but from a Christian worldview. I wanted a discussion from the Christian worldview on, are ROMs legal? Is that something that is okay for Christians to engage in? Which, by the way, we have covered it. It's one of our very earliest episodes. I think it's episode 6 or 7. You guys can check that out. But I wanted to hear talks about that. I want to hear talks about, like, can Christians enjoy Grand Theft Auto and it not be a sin? What can we learn from games like BioShock? How does the worldview of that game meet the Christian worldview, and where do we agree? Where do we disagree? How can I enjoy this game with my Christian worldview more? And I couldn't find anything that was doing that at the time. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And then here we are, like 5 years later, and here's the show. And so that's really what we tend to do on the show. I think Adam would agree with this, that we'll never really tell you to not play a game. Like, we're not going to get on here and tell you that you're in sin if you're playing Grand Theft Auto, because we've done that before and we've gotten some angry emails. But we're not going to, that's not the aim of our show, right? The aim of our show is not to play games or look at certain video games and tell you, oh, you shouldn't be playing those. But we do want to have a conversation about those kinds of games. We'll ask good questions about, what the content in Grand Theft Auto, or the content in God of War, or the content in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. We're going to ask you those questions, not to get you to not play it, but to get you to think, okay, how does my Christian worldview interact and engage with the worldview that's being presented in this game? How can I enjoy this game to the glory of God? No, that's basically it. We basically try to get you to think of, how can you enjoy this game to the glory of God? And Adam, I know you put some verses here in the show notes. Let's go ahead and tackle a couple of these, kind of further round out this idea in terms of practice. And so if you would start with, these all come from 1 Corinthians, which is great, because it's going to make it easy for me to bounce around
So apparently Paul
through
had
these.
something to say.
It is, man. It is.
For us.
Maybe Paul was a reformed gamer back in the day.
Yeah.
But man, starting off, go ahead and read a couple of these. I'll tackle the last one in chapter 9.
Yeah, well, in 1 Corinthians 10:31, it says, so whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. And really, these all play together in a lot of ways. Paul's addressing so many things in the book of 1 Corinthians. He's talking about disunity, he's talking about the resurrection, he's talking about food, sacrifice to idol, and the division that these things are that they were causing within the church there. So a lot of this is kind of on that issue there of, some people are saying, can I eat this? Can I not eat this? Is it causing someone to sin? And so we get to that one. So whether you eat or drink, whatever you do it all to the glory of God. And then, even a part of this conversation, you find in chapter 6, verse 12, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. And so I think we really see, when we talk about, when I talk about our podcast with people, kind of my elevator pitch is, it's me and a buddy from seminary, and we talk about video games from a Christian worldview. And that means talking about stewardship of time. It talks about different types of games and themes, sifting them through the Christian worldview. And really, one of the biggest things is it comes down to this, that whatever we do, we want to do it to the glory of God. And so if I'm playing video games, I want to allow God to redeem that in some form. It doesn't mean that you can't just, veg out and play video games, but if able, I want God to be able to redeem this even more than just the recreation that it gives me. And so that's what this podcast has allowed us to do in some ways, is to even more redeem this hobby that we have, and where now we can be a resource to people, we can be a witness to people, we can be an encouragement to others, and just proving that, hey, we don't have to be closet Christian gamers. Like, we can talk about our love for video games, we can talk about, how we interact with them, and we can be an encouragement, because we've talked about this, I feel like, a lot throughout our history, is there are millions and millions of people that play video games. Yeah. And as Christians, we should be engaging them in some way. And this is a way for us to be engaging the gaming world and to be a light in that industry. And so that's a big part of what we do here at TRG. But another part of that conversation is that second text that said, yes, we have the right to play video games, and this is where you kind of mentioned we don't really tell someone. I mean, there might be some games that we'd say probably not wise. There were
Right.
some Jesus games that came out that were depicting him poorly, and
Yeah.
we'll give some discernment, wisdom, and saying this may not be the wisest choice to play, but in the end, it comes down to your conscience and the way the Spirit is working in your life. And it comes on this idea of, yes, we may be able to play video games, and we may be able to play almost any video game, because video games inherently aren't sinful, but that doesn't mean it's helpful. It doesn't mean it's beneficial to me to play that game, because it may cause me or someone else to stumble. And, just video games in general, you have like cage stage Calvinism. There's almost cage stage TRGism. When you're
Yeah.
a new member, to TRG, you get in the group and you're like, this is awesome. Like, I remember
Yeah.
when I joined the group, you're like, oh my gosh, like, these people are awesome. They're talking about games that I've never played. Now I feel like I've got to play every game in the world because everyone has a favorite game, and I've played
Yep.
none of them. I've got Metal Gear Solid, I've got the Legend of Zelda series, I've got Persona. I could give you, 10 more games that I had never played before I got in the group. And all of a sudden everyone's saying, if you're a real gamer, you got to play these games. And it's almost overwhelming. And if you're
That's a
not
good word.
careful, it can become dominating. It can begin becoming idolatrous, really. And so we really speak to that a lot in the podcast of, hey, we love this recreation and hobby of video games, but we also understand that we have priorities in ministry and life and family, and those are always going to be higher than our video games. And this podcast helps us continue to discuss those things and flesh those things out. And so, video games are a great gift of God, but that doesn't mean that I have to. Well, first of all, it doesn't mean that I should be dominated by them, because video games can be very addictive. So I don't need to be dominated from them. And I definitely need to be aware of, okay, I can play this, but is this beneficial and is this helpful for me to me right now? And these are the types of questions that we're often engaging in our podcast.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And so to kind of finish rounding this section out, or this portion of the topic, let's read from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 23, which reads, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings." Now, I've got a few things that I can think of from that relate to the show, but Adam, what is it about these verses here that led you to put that in here to be included as this to be included in part of this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was just kind of talking about. There are millions of people that play video games. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to play video games, but there needs to be Christians that play video games to be able to engage them. And so, as a gamer, I want to be a good gamer to the glory of God, not dominated by them. But the goal, even in video games, yes, it is there for recreation and relaxation. But if by God's divine grace, through my gaming, it could come and be a part of someone coming to know Christ, then that's what we're all about. I mean, as much as we want to discuss video games, I mean, we've hit some real topics. We've shared the gospel on our podcast. I mean, when we added, it really went to a new level when we added what have we been reading.
Oh, absolutely.
That was really almost a turning point for the podcast in some ways, because as we were discussing that back when I first came on, I was like, if we're going to be a Christian podcast, let's be a Christian podcast. Yes, we're talking about games from the Christian worldview, but let's really get into it. Let's talk about things we're learning from books or the Word. And it really allowed us to even open up more without being forced. We're not forcing anything. It's what we do. We talk about what we're playing. but we also are talking about what we're reading, and that really has given us opportunities to share the gospel, to share Christ, to share our struggles, what we're learning, and really just talk truth. And so, like it says there at the end, I do it for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them and its blessings. Our goal is to play video games for the glory of God, but if through our conversations about video games, it might draw someone closer to God, and if they're not a believer, potentially even help them with becoming that. So that's really what I take out of that is, I want to become a gamer to gamers, because that's a passion that God has given me and something that I enjoy. So as much as I'm able, balancing everything with responsibilities, I want to be a gamer to gamers, that I might reach a gamer for Christ.
Yeah, man, absolutely. That's pretty much where I would come from it too. That's one of the cool things about our community is seeing a lot of Christians get involved in gaming, whether that's, Destiny 2 or it's on Twitch. The way that folks in our community are reaching out to people to share the gospel is really cool. And I actually was reminded of something that David Benjamin tweeted at us, because I asked a question of, how does your Christian faith influence your gaming practices? And he said, he tries to use it as a tool to evangelize. I'm like, dude, let's go. That's awesome. And I know he is one of the people. He actually has a really good Destiny 2 clan called, I think it's Ask Us About Jesus, I believe is what it's called. So it's pretty straightforward. But I mean, that's what they do when they play Destiny 2. They raid with people, they do Crucible with people, and they form those relationships, and they tell the gospel, And so that's kind of what it's all about, is all of that there that we've talked about. And so, like I said, the word reformed, it means two things, both in our theology and our practice. But let's kind of dig in a little bit into how we approach playing video games. And we may have discussed this before on like what sort of things keep us from playing or things like that. But let's kind of discuss the things that tend to draw us into a video game, and then maybe discuss some of the things that repel us from certain video games. And I want to make something clear when we get into the part where we're talking about what repels us from playing a game. We're not bringing those up in a way to bind your conscience. We're just sharing like, hey, based on my time in scripture and where I'm at, I just choose not to interact with this particular kind of content or this particular game. We're not saying you're in sin if you do. Just want to make that clear in case some people may misunderstand that portion of the topic. But man, so when it comes to video games, what are some things that draw you in?
We talk about this all the time, of how our gaming habits, our interests have changed in the last, for me, really since the podcast began, last 5-6 years. Back in the day, I was very much a sports and shooter gamer. I would play the college football, Madden, NBA games, any sports game, and then I'd play the CODs, SOCOM, and then maybe, like Grand Theft Auto. I was pretty, I was in that box for the most part.
Right.
But as, I've been in the community, and it's really been changed a lot of, I love, it's storytelling.
Yeah.
If it's up to me, if I can watch a show or play a game, I want to play a game because I'm playing the story that they're trying to tell.
Yeah.
No, I'm not always that. I'll play some multiplayer games that are just, Fortnite's, Call of Duty Warzone. I'll jump on the occasional sports game here or there. But really, the biggest thing that draws me at this point of my gaming life is just, it's the storytelling aspect of, what kind of story do they have to tell me? What kind of themes are we going to see? It's that art side of, you're seeing some crazy things happen visually. And, I could watch a 2-hour movie, or I could play a 10, 12, 20-hour video game and get to be a part of that experience. So, that's really the biggest thing for me. It doesn't mean I can't play a game that's just good gameplay. But that's probably the biggest draw. And if you look at a lot of the games that I play, I'm thinking of like Last of Us, and even, I think on the opposite end of that is, I know there's a story to this, but I couldn't really tell you all that's exactly going on. But I think of a game like Doom and Doom Eternal. Played both of those over the last month and a half, beat them both. And there's a story there for sure, and Doom Eternal. But honestly, I'm not reading all of the different codexes and things like that. I'm playing that because the gameplay loop is a lot of fun, and
Right.
there's enough story to keep me interacting. But in the end, I'm just there to slay demons. I'm just rip and
Yeah.
tear.
Rip and tear, man.
So those are games, and I know you guys. I mean, you guys talked a lot about this on the last podcast. On the last podcast, there are a lot of themes and things. So, but the gameplay is really what it's known for. So that's probably the biggest thing that draws me to a game is what kind of story do they have to tell me? Because
Yeah.
I mean, look at our lives. Look at the Bible. We are storytelling people. Often as we go through trials or different things in life, maybe it's a scary situation that you just got by or something. I'm like, hey, you got a story to tell. We love stories. That's what we are about as people. And
Yeah.
so the more it's like reading books. It's that book coming to life. So that's what I really like about these games is just that the ability to draw you into a story.
Yeah. And I'm very much the same way. I mean, I'm always fascinated at what kind of world people can come up with. And when I think of some of my favorite pieces of entertainment, whether it's a book, a movie, or even a video game, it's always been something that has pushed me or has really just done a very good job of building a world and fleshing that out with its characters and seeing myself in those situations and asking, okay, how would I respond in this situation? I think that one of the earliest games that I can think of that really did a good job of making me ask, what would I do in the situation are the Mass Effect games.
Mm.
It's just really good storytelling, really good, just kind of putting you in there, letting you make your own decisions, and in a way, trailblazing your own kind of story based on the choices that you made. And it's just such a cool series. And so I think with that, it's very much the same way as you, man. I love a good story. I love one that, I love stories that, I think for me, I love stories that tend to ask really difficult questions or present difficult themes. That's one of the reasons why I like BioShock so much, is because it asks some really good questions, but while at the same time showing you the fallout of those questions when you follow them through to their logical conclusion. And it does it, especially that world is just so creative of Rapture, man. I mean, dear listeners, you can go listen to our episode on BioShock, but that's the stuff that kind of grips me. If you have a really good story with a compelling cast of characters, I'll usually stick around even if the gameplay isn't all that great.
Mm.
But that being said, I'm a stickler for fine-tuned controls. So I may not stick around too long if the controls aren't very good. That's kind of the more gameplay side of things. But those are the two things that really tend to draw me into a game: is really good story with characters, and then on the gameplay side, really solid controls. Usually I can play a game if it has really good storytelling and not so good controls. But if it's just not a good story, not good or with good controls, it depends on what it is. I have flip-flops, so we'll see what kind of game it is and what day it is. But when it comes to that too, man, because how do I say this? We use our Christian worldview to influence the kinds of games that we play, and especially with how we interact with certain games. And with that being said, there's some things that we tend to maybe not go near, or maybe we won't play it, or we have some hesitancy with playing it. Whether that's a specific theme that's in a game, or it's the types of content that's in there. But what are some things that kind of push you away from games, Adam?
Yeah. I mean, well, again, the opposite of what I just said. A game with a bad story will
Yeah.
turn me away. Now, that's sometimes harder to know. It takes some time to
Yeah.
really develop. Okay, where is the story going, and do I want to follow it? really some of the things that the biggest things that draw me away from a game. Again, if I know where the story is going, okay, that can turn me off. Crazy amounts of gore and violence can turn me off. And I talked earlier about The Last of Us. I was expecting what I feel like way worse than what I've got thus far, and so there were moments where playing like Doom Eternal. I mean, that game can get pretty gruesome, but
Definitely.
it's animated enough to where these are made up demons, so it doesn't bother me. But if it's really realistic stuff, that can be a turn off. Probably the biggest turn off, now that the more I think about it, is dark themes. The best example would be Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice.
Yeah.
I never finished it. I played most of the game, but it was so dark. The themes, the psychosis stuff, like, I mean, the visuals. I mean, you're like, I don't remember if you're like in hell or whatever, but it's a very dark game. That's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, turnoffs. Is
Yeah.
like, I don't want to play a game that's extremely dark, and so I don't play a ton of horror games for that same reason. So that's probably my biggest one, is the darkness aspect. Like, we have enough darkness in our world. I don't necessarily want to play that. Like, and again, you could say I'm not being consistent because, again, I'm killing people in video games. But again,
Sure.
it's a video game. But the dark piece, that the reason I probably struggle is because that stuff affects me. I'm not being tempted to go out and kill someone because I'm killing something in a video game. But
Right.
dark images, dark thoughts, those stick around.
Yeah, they'll stay with you.
I could have a nightmare. I could dream about these things if I play right before bed. It can affect the things that I think about, my mood. And so I'm always very careful about those games. Of, do I want to be putting that into my mind? Because I'm like everyone else. I can struggle getting those things out of my head. So that's probably
Right.
the biggest thing as I think about all this. Of course, I don't want to play a game with a ton of nudity or sex scenes and things like that.
Right.
But the biggest story-based thing is probably those dark themes. I really struggle with those.
Yeah. I hear you. I think for me, kind of going the route of the dark themes is kind of what I was trying to reference earlier. I don't mind that in games when it's done right. But I will agree that Hellblade is a very intense, cerebral kind of game. And I think what helped me get through it to the end was that it was like, especially, I played that game at a time in my life when I was coming to terms with my own mental illness. For those that don't know, if you're new to the show, I struggle with chronic depression, which is totally fun. Of course, that's sarcasm. And so I was really coming to grips with that. I was like, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for me as a Christian? What does that look like? And so while I was trying to come to terms with that, and playing that game, like, Senua was in the very same boat of trying to come to grips with that. And so in a way, it was a cathartic experience because we were both battling our own darkness through a game. And then to reach that and to really defeat that darkness and come to this point of like, oh man, the ending of that game is so cool because there's this weight being lifted. There's light coming through. There's a moment of hope. I remember Senua's line where she says, come on, there's more to tell. Like there's more of a story to go. And there's still stuff to do. And I'm like, man, that's so good. And so when stuff is done that way, I guess that particularly doesn't bother me. But I do agree that when dark things are in a game that are done a certain way, it really sticks with you. Like for me personally, I don't do anything, and this is going to sound contradictory because I played Doom Eternal, but I'll unpack it a little bit later. When it comes to stuff like demonic stuff, I do stay away from it. Doom Eternal is a different case because I think you guys can go back to that episode and listen to it. It was a different case because it's very cartoony. It's just not accurate, right? So I was able to make that disconnect and be like, okay, this isn't really what hell's like, but this gives me an idea of what spiritual warfare looks like that I'm not seeing going on around me. So that kind of gave me a better idea. Again, I explained that in the Doom Eternal episode, but it's the same with horror movies. I don't handle that stuff in there because I know that stuff is real. I don't want that in my head. I don't want that sticking with me. It's one of the reasons why I have a hard time playing Darksiders nowadays. I just the demon character that's your sidekick, Volgrim. I don't like it. It really bothers me playing that game. The idea of giving souls to demons really bothers me. And so I can't play those games anymore because I don't like those concepts that are being used in the game. Whereas in Doom Eternal, you don't have any of that. You are the one slaying demons and taking them down. And you're just upgrading your mechanized suit, to wage war against the forces of darkness. And so those are two games that use those dark themes in different ways. That one is like, okay, I'm okay with that. There's another one where it's like, I really try to stay away from that. And then, there's another thing where, and this is kind of what's making it, what's holding me back from playing Last of Us Part 2, is just the idea of excessive violence. In Kevin Schute's book of Games and God, he calls it exploitative violence. And this is where violence is in a game, but it is shown to a degree that is excessive. I think the game that everybody can think of that immediately comes to mind when I mention that is Mortal Kombat. I've tried multiple times to get back into Mortal Kombat 11. I played Mortal Kombat growing up and really enjoyed it, but it's a game that every time I find myself playing it, I find myself more and more repulsed by just the fatalities, some of the like combo breaker cutscene things that you can pull off. It's really graphic, it's really excessive, and it really genuinely bothers me, which kind of bums me out because they put RoboCop in there, and I'd love to see RoboCop fight Terminator because that would be a cool fight.
I've seen some of the different videos of that. There's some epic.
It's so goofy, man. But like, at the same time, like while that pushes me away from Mortal Kombat, I think I'm at a place where I can be like, okay, I don't like the content, but from a mechanical standpoint, the game is well built, on that grounds. But I do think that the content in the game is really excessive, and so those are two really big things that bother me. Because of my past with, this is just me being transparent on this episode. I struggled with a pornography addiction in high school, and so I avoid games that have nudity in them, sexual content, things of that nature, because I just know that is a weakness for me, and I really just don't need to put that before me. And I've just realized that, especially over the past few years of doing this podcast, there are games that tell great stories that don't include that stuff. Mm-hmm. And they don't need to, because that's one of the things I love about Xenoblade right now, is that it is telling a very deep, complex story without excessive violence, without nudity, there's some cussing in it, but you kind of understand it in the context of the characters because it's intense situations. It's not like the game is riddled with cuss words. It's very, very, very sparingly. And there's not really demonic things. It's just it's a very well crafted story.
And then you play the second one, and there's all the fan,
which I think that's why I was so turned off from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, because I'm like, you guys have such a good game in the first one that you don't need to go this route, and you win it anyway. And I think the game suffers because of that. And so that's me. Those are some of the things that push me away from games. So you guys kind of have a better idea of how we approach games, how we'll interact with certain games, how we'll talk about certain games on the podcast. But Adam, as we kind of start winding the topic portion down, is there anything else that you would want to add to kind of help give people an idea of kind of what we're all about on the show? No, how we're going to approach things?
Yeah, well, I think kind of going back to what we're about as a show, and really even as a community. Yes, we have the podcast, but we would encourage you, as much as we want you to listen to our podcast, we want you to be involved in the community on either Discord or Facebook or on Twitter. You can follow us. That's where you really begin to reap the benefits of what the Reformed Gamers are. You get to know people, you get to be blessed by people, you get to bless other people. We've talked about it more than we need. I mean, we don't need to go to it, but we've both been blessed by the podcast through different things. And so, as much as we're about playing games for the glory of God and being a light to other gamers and approaching games and dissecting them from a Christian worldview, I mean, these things are all really for us about relationships, like most things in life. And so I'd encourage you to get a part of the Facebook group or Discord or whatever, whichever is your favorite platform, and begin engaging with people. I mean, it's a great place. There are some awesome, awesome people who love Jesus and love video games, and honestly will love on you if you allow them to get engaged in your life as you open up and get vulnerable. So that'd be kind of it's kind of outside of this conversation, but also really a part of it is make sure you get involved in the community, because it's always been a huge blessing in many ways. Like there's a couple guys, we'll get on there. There's trolls, and we all like to we know who we can kind of mess with and joke with. But in the end, I know there's a ton of people in the group that would do a lot of things for me if I called on them. And so I'm really grateful for that.
Definitely. And I don't think I could have said that any better, man. The community, that's, I guess really the Reformed Gamers is there's three different aspects of it. You have the theology and the practice of it, and then you have the community side of things, which is where really a lot of this stuff gets fleshed out. It gets, it's like that verse, as iron sharpens iron, it's really where a lot of that takes place. And it's a great place to meet some other like-minded Christians for your Overwatch squad or Destiny or whatever game it is you're playing, or even just talk about some of your favorite games. There's a small group of guys in the Facebook group that love talking about the Trails in the Sky series, whatever that game is. I can't remember what the whole, there's like some word that goes with it. I can't pronounce it, but so if you like those games, there's a group for it. I mean, there's something in there for everybody. So definitely check out the community there. But with that being said, dear listeners, hopefully that gives you a good idea of what we're all about here on the Reformed Gamers. Let us know some of the things or some of the ways that you use your Christian faith to interact with video games on our social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I mean, literally anywhere and everywhere except for TikTok because, well, security issues. So with that being said, Adam, as we always do before we end the show, man, let's give our listeners some recos, man. What are some things that our dear listeners should be checking out?
Yeah, one of them I mentioned earlier, the fixture S1. You can find it on Indiegogo. That's where I picked it up. I think that's the only place that you can buy it right now. If you're looking for something to, excuse me, play with your Pro Controller when you're not on the television, it's a great little adapter to check out. And then I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but for scripture memory, we've been watching these worship songs that are basically scripture to music. It's called Seeds Family Worship. There's some of them that I'm like, okay, I don't really care for this version. But there's a lot of them that are catchy, and it's been cool seeing, for myself to memorize some scripture through these songs, but really for even Rin. Like, she's 2.5, and she's like memorizing scripture through these songs, which is like one of my favorite things in the world. So check that out if you have little ones that like music. They're really catchy little songs, and it really, I mean, it's edifying me. It's growing me. It's helping me learn scripture, and so I'd say check that out also.
Right on. Good stuff. My recos this week are going to be check out the Steam Summer Sale because that's going on and I can finally participate in it because I built a PC. Man, it was awesome seeing all those Final Fantasy games go on sale, and I picked some of them up. I won't talk about them on the show. Longtime listeners know there was the Dark Ages where I played 5 or 6 Final Fantasy games back to back over the course of 2 years. Yeah, that was rough. So I won't talk about those on here, but I did pick those up, and I picked up a few other games as well. I picked up Red Dead Redemption 2 on PC, which I'm looking forward to actually, hopefully finishing. Made about 20 hours into it on PS4 and then quit, so we'll see if I make it any longer on there. My other reco is, of course, Godspeed, just referencing that earlier. It's a great tabletop game, and I want you guys to know, I'm not just saying that because Clay is, he's been on the show, friend of ours, you guys can take that with a grain of salt, if you guys want to do that. But I really do like the game. There is a steep learning curve, but once you get the hang of it, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of strategy to it, and it is a good time. And that kind of leads into my final reco, which is take a break. Take a break. And what I mean by that is, I took a week off from work, podcasting, the TRG behind the scenes stuff, going to the office ministry and all that stuff. And it brought a ton of much needed rest and clarity in a lot of ways for myself. So I don't know if you have gotten the opportunity to take a break amidst all of just everything that has been going on this year, but find some time to take maybe a handful of days or even an entire week or maybe 2 weeks if you need it, and just really spend that time to just kind of shut your brain off from work, the normal routines, and spend some time with your family and get into the Word and just see how that just refreshes you and just see what it does. See what it does. That being said, dear listeners, thank you again for listening to this episode of The Reformed Gamers. There's a lot of different ways that you can interact with us. Again, if you would like to support us financially, you can go over to patreon.com/TheReformedGamers to lend your support there and get some exclusive perks and things of that nature. As always, you can follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Logan every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Would love for you to stop by and we can hang out. You can always go to the website, thereformedgamers.com, for resources, opinion pieces on different things going on in the gaming world from a Christian worldview, and show notes to all of our past episodes as well. You can follow us on Twitter at TRG Podcast. You can like our Facebook page or join the Facebook group at facebook.com. You can also follow us on Instagram, instagram.com/ I think it's The Reformed Gamers. Maybe it's TRG Podcast. Link will be in your show notes because it'll just be easier that way and you won't have to worry about it. But until next time, dear listeners, be a deer, keep it locked here. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Reformed Gamers, the podcast all about theology and gaming. TRG is edited by Deer Ear Productions, so thank them for the buttery smooth tones in your ear. If you're looking for extra content, head on over to youtube.com/TheReformedGamers. The Reformed Gamers is entirely fan-supported over on patreon.com/TheReformedGamers by our dear patrons. The following deer are at the producer level or higher and will forever be thanked at the end of each show, as long as their pledge comes through, or we forget to update the audio. Those people are David Matthews, Colin Gregory, and Wesley Ray. Thank you for your support on patreon.com, keeping our controllers charged, and supporting Logan in his never-ending quest to collect them all. Platinum trophies, that is. So be a deer and keep it locked here. Keep listening. We'll catch you later.